Welcome to Advice for Grad Students. I'm Phil Haun, and with me today is Caitlin Talmadge. We're both alum from the MIT SSP program. Caitlin, welcome today.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Well, it's great to have you. First, a disclaimer that the views expressed here are our own and don't reflect that of our institutions. And Caitlin has agreed to talk with us about a topic that many grad students don't really think about, which is conferences. And so, Caitlin, let's just get right into it. What do grad students need to know about conferences?
They should know that conferences are a really important part of your education and your professional development during your time in grad school. I would argue, especially as you become a more advanced grad student, they're just as important as anything you might formally do at your home institutions. And the main reason is that conferences are a way for you to break out of your home institution and get out of your cocoon and meet other scholars who are working in the field, both your peers as well as more senior people in the field, especially the more senior people who might be on job search committees in the future or might be on fellowship committee selection committees and so forth. And so it's obviously very important to have roots in your home program, but it's also important to branch out. And conferences are the main way to do that. And so, in thinking about how to kind of break into the conference scene, I guess I have a few pieces of advice if you want me to kind of go over maybe the how a little bit.
Sure.
Sure thing. So one piece of advice I would give, and this isn't doable for everybody, but if you have a chance, go to a conference early in grad school without the pressure of presenting. Just go and just watch and observe. I was fortunate enough to be able to do this. I think when I was maybe a third year grad student, I think there was an APSA meeting that was relatively close to where I was living. It wasn't that expensive to go. And I went, and it was really helpful in demystifying what the process was at a conference. Like what do conferences look like? How do they work? How do the panels work? What are the different roles of people? What is the state of papers that are presented as works in progress at conferences? And it helped me to realize, like, hey, this would be a fun thing to branch out into. This is a way to get feedback on my work. This is a way to meet people who are working in similar areas to me. And I was able to do that without the pressure of performing and presenting for the first time. And so I highly recommend doing that if logistics and finances allow you to, because I think it can be really eye-opening. Then you hopefully move on to the stage where you are not only observing a conference, but you actually attend one. And it can be kind of hard sometimes to get a place on a panel at a conference because let's be real, like, you're a grad student, nobody knows who you are because you haven't published yet. Why haven't you published? Because you haven't been to a conference. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. And so you have to think a little bit strategically, how am I going to actually get accepted onto a panel? And one way to do that is to network through other mechanisms in your field, to network through smaller workshops or fellowships and so forth. But another way to do it is to actually be entrepreneurial and form your own panels. And I remember doing this, multiple years in grad school where, of course, I knew what I was working on. Nobody else did, but I did. I knew what I was working on, and I knew the other scholars who were working in my area, the scholars outside my institution that I wanted, I wanted to engage with them. I wanted to know what they were working on. I wanted to know what they thought about my work. I wanted to get their advice. And I formed panels around the papers that I wanted to present, and I started reaching out to those senior scholars. And I found, first of all, they were often very receptive because senior scholars are really busy and they don't even have time to form these panels. I would come after them as soon as the call went out that APSA or ISA was open for business. I'd start thinking about this. I start emailing them, and a lot of times they'd say, "Sure, like, thank you for organizing this panel. This would be great." And it took a little bit of a burden off them, and they were often happy to do it. And I would say that they could present their own work, or even better, like, get one of them to be a discussant and actually read my paper, read another grad student's paper, give us feedback and so forth. And so that can be a really good way to get yourself onto a panel. And I found often that if I could get one really senior person to agree to be on the panel, a big name marquee player in the field, then it was often very easy to collect 4 or 5 other people. If you could get that one big person, you could kind of bring everyone else along. And it isn't that much work. And it's a really good way to increase your chances of panel acceptance by the conference, because again, you got a couple big names on there and you're kind of riding the coattails. So that's kind of the how to apply and how to get onto a conference, hopefully. And you may not get on everyone as a grad student, but you hope to have a couple of those. And then maybe we should talk a little bit about the conference itself and kind of what to do at the conference. And
yeah, let me make a couple of comments. One is, if you're not as good an entrepreneur as you are, you could do what I did, which is free ride. So I have a friend who puts together a conference. That's a good way to get in. And the other thing I found, minor conferences, regional conferences are sometimes easier to get into. And so you can break into the big leagues, go into those. And finally, that first conference, one of the things I always advise is go see the big, huge talking head that you've only read on paper and who is not human yet in your mind. Go see them actually talk, and that makes it easier to engage their material. Anyway, that's enough of my comments. Let's continue on. What else do you have here?
Those are great pieces of advice. And that's one of the things I love about conferences in general, is you kind of see other people's first drafts and you realize that, like, even really great scholars, like, their work has to go through a lot of stages to get as good as you think it is when it's in its final form. But yeah, regional conferences are great. And then when you're actually at the conference, you need to be prepared for your panel. That's your first task, is to do your commitment of your panel. I personally do not like to use conferences as a deadline mechanism. And what I mean by that is, when I apply to a conference, and this is true even now, I don't apply to a conference saying to myself, oh, by having this conference where I have to present a paper that I turn in, that will make me finish a paper that isn't finished now. 95% of the time, if I am applying to a conference or agreeing to a talk, I already have the thing that I want to present in pretty good shape. It's already either in the can or it's far along the tracks. I don't like to go to a conference and feel like I've kind of slapped something together. I like to, present the work in as good of a state as I can get it. Obviously, it's not perfect. That's why I'm going to the conference. But I think that's especially true when you're a grad student. You want to be putting your best foot forward. And so, when you're, thinking about what paper you're going to send, pick something that, you're relatively, sure is going to be polished or, in good shape by the time of the conference. And part of the reason to do that is because when you're actually at the conference, you need to be prepared to present your work well, which is different from just having written a good paper. So if you're up till like midnight on the plane the night before just writing the paper, your presentation is not going to be very good. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people at the conference are never going to read your paper. If they hear anything from you and form any impression of you, it's going to be based on your presentation. And again, you don't want to fall into the trap of saying, oh, I only have 5 minutes to speak. I only have 7 minutes to speak. I'll just start talking because anyone can fill up 5 minutes. That's true. You can fill up 5 minutes with stuff that is not going to reflect well on your research. It's actually much harder to talk concisely for 5 to 10 minutes about your research than to talk for an hour, because in an hour, you don't have to make any big decisions. In 5 minutes, you better have your points from your paper down cold. And I recommend that you have your talk, use some slides if you're going to use them, but have that ready. Have that ready the week before the conference. You should be practicing that with, a grad student colleague. You should be practicing that in the mirror. That should be in good shape, because you never know at a conference, like, who is going to walk in the room when you're giving that talk. Imagine that's a person who's going to be on a hiring committee the next year. So you should be thinking of every talk is a job talk. Every presentation, especially in this sort of setting where, like, you might have formed the panel, you have chosen the paper you're presenting. You have all the ability in the world to actually control how prepared you are for this. And so take it seriously and prepare on your panel. You look like you want to jump in on something, Phil?
Well, I'm fascinated with this. I'm with you on this. I've also started effectively Zoom recording my 5-minute presentations and watching them because you're absolutely right. There, you know, I'm on the administrative side. I do hiring. Every time I go to a conference, I'm looking for talent, and
Yeah.
expect that that's why a significant portion of the people there are there.
Absolutely. You know, people are looking at you and saying, like, gee, if I brought this person in for a job talk, would they embarrass me? Are they going to be prepared for a job talk? You know, and so you want to use that 5 to 10 minutes to show yourself as you know, in as good of a light as you can. But the other thing I would say is, you know, beyond your own paper, read the other papers on the panel. You know, be prepared to offer feedback and commentary and be useful. Because often, you know, scholars, everybody's kind of in it for themselves. It's like scholars may have more of a memory of the help that you gave them on their paper. You know, that may create you know, a better impression than necessarily, you know, what they remember from your paper. So, you know, you don't want to be just a taker. You want to be a giver and be part of the intellectual collaboration on the panel.
I would agree
Um,
with that. Agree to be a chair. Agree to be a discussant. I quite often get more out of those roles than I
yep,
do actually presenting, seeing what other people are doing. We got
absolutely.
we're almost out of time. Do you have anything stored up as far
The
as conferences?
the one other thing I want to say, and this goes back to a point, Phil, that you already raised, is besides your panel, get out and about at the conference. And I don't even just mean other panels. Definitely go to other panels, but you should be having coffee with people. You should be having lunch, breakfast, dinner. You know, if you're paying all this money to go to the conference, you should be essentially working like morning to night. You should be, you know, and a lot of it doesn't feel like work because often you're seeing friends and, you know, people you really like, but you should be using that time to really network, meet people, go to receptions, meet with editors. You know, it's absolutely one of those rare times when tons of people in the field are there, and you want to see as many of them as you can, not only on panels but also outside of panels.
Yeah, and that last thing you top, I use the editors that show up who are, I'll try to get an appointment with them. I come with a list of potential projects and I pitch it. I have a couple of editors that I trust,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll tell me, boy, that will never go for whatever reason. And some they're like, well, I'm actually kind of interested in that. And so even as a grad student, it's not too early to begin approaching editors to see how the process works. And we're going to be
Absolutely.
talking about some of that in one of our upcoming talks with you.
Yep.
All
Looking
right.
forward to it.
All right. Thank you very much, Caitlin. And thanks to the audience for advice for grad students.